Good evening and welcome to Newsline. I'm Rachel McFadden.
And I'm Danisha Dias. Coming up on Newsline, machetes are still out for the asylum seekers Australia sends to PNG. And later we look at the rise of the craft beer industry.
But first, United States President Barack Obama has outlined his vision for a new US foreign policy agenda. Speaking to West Point graduates, Obama said they may be the first to graduate since 9/11 that won't be sent to Afghanistan or Iraq. President Obama said the US will lead the world in pursuing a balanced approach between strong diplomatic and military action, but only when necessary.
If I did not think that the security of the United States and the safety of the American people were at stake in Afghanistan, I would gladly order every single one of our troops home tomorrow.
This follows the announcement of a partial troop withdrawal from Afghanistan last week.
A Roy Morgan survey has found US President Barack Obama is the public figure most admired by Australians, followed closely by former Prime Minister Julia Gillard. It seems irony is alive and well out there. Current Prime Minister Tony Abbott comes in at a distant sixth behind John Howard and the Queen. Newsline took to the streets to find out what people are saying about political leaders, past and present.
Kevin Rudd.
And why is that?
He went to a strip club. It just makes it seem like he's like every other Australian. He got dogged by his own party, so that's I can relate to that.
A little while ago, it used to be Pauline Hanson, but she's not doing it anymore.
And do you have a worst political leader and why?
At the moment, it's Tony Abbott because of the budget.
Well, in Australia, Tony Abbott, obviously.
Tony Abbott, it's pretty bad. Christopher Pyne as well.
To be honest, a political leader to me is just a face. It's just the person that we all can relate to, but I don't believe that political leader actually makes the decisions. So I believe it comes down to government as a whole.
I think Paul Keating, actually, because he was prepared to take hard decisions and wasn't too fussed about, the popularity of making those decisions, and he turned out to be a very good treasurer.
I don't admire any political leaders. I've never admired any. I think that the government doesn't do a very good job of managing the country.
To more news now with Paul Miller. And Paul, it looks like increasing live exports is on the government's agenda.
That's right, Rachel. Federal Minister for Agriculture Barnaby Joyce has announced a controversial agreement with Iran to lift the ban on Australian live exports to the Islamic Republic. The announcement brings an end to the 40-year boycott on live animal trade with Iran that followed the Islamic Revolution. The minister hailed the agreement as a victory for the Australian livestock industry, predicting the new market could be worth up to 1.3 million head of sheep per year. The move is widely condemned by animal rights advocates, with the RSPCA describing the agreement as a disaster for animal welfare. And still on agriculture, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission is accusing the egg industry of planning to slaughter millions of hens prematurely in a bid to boost profits. The consumer watchdog says egg producers held a crisis meeting in 2012 to address the problem of overproduction. This is where the plan was allegedly hatched to create a false shortage in order to drive up prices. The ACCC is taking the Australian Egg Corporation and two major producers to the federal court following allegations the companies work together as a cartel. The Australian Egg Corporation says it will cooperate fully with the ACCC, but can't comment further while the case is before the court.
A day after Scott Morrison released a report on the Manus Island riots, asylum seekers at the Manus Detention Centre are facing new threats of attacks from locals. According to the Refugee Action Coalition, 10 machete-wielding locals this week interrupted a game of football between asylum seekers, forcing them and their transfield guard to run back to Mike compound for safety. This is the same compound in which Iranian asylum seeker Reza Barati was murdered. Human rights activists in Australia are demanding greater transparency on offshore detention and better access to asylum seekers currently imprisoned. Troy Nankervis has the story.
A public PNG court inquiry into conditions on the Manus Island Detention Centre has revealed disturbing allegations, yet the Australian media are still unable to tell the whole story.
David Cannings, who initiated this inquiry, which is the reason that we were allowed inside to visit the centre. His orders were we weren't allowed to interview any asylum seekers.
It took a court order from the national court of another country for an Australian journalist to take a photo.
Human rights experts are demanding that the Abbott government follow suit and give greater access to the media.
The human rights framework and human rights law does require that there be proper access and transparency around these sorts of centres, and the Australian government's definitely falling short of that in the area of asylum seekers and immigration detention at the moment.
Human Rights Commissioner Tim Wilson says that limits to the Australian media are limits to freedom of speech.
Journalists should have a right to go inside Australian facilities. I understand that sometimes that has to be done in a managed way, and I don't mean managed as interference, but it can't just be people walking in and out of detention centres because of the impact it can have on both people in detention centres, but of course also maintaining order and everything else.
While human rights activists are free to campaign for justice on Manus Island, media access continues to be heavily controlled. It seems that politics are getting in the way of truth.
The position office I hold carries weight and status, and least of all because I've been appointed by a government. If I say something that disagrees with them, that has its own type of weight in terms of, I guess you'd say, political perception.
The key question for us is whether the ends justify the means. And I think what our government doesn't necessarily respect is that that's our judgment to make. It's our judgment to make whether what is happening in our name is justifiable.
The inquiry continues. Troy Nankervis for Newsline.
Thanks, Troy. To business now with Craig Dunlop. And Craig, we hear the Prime Minister has finally found a friendly audience to talk to about the budget.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Last night, the PM spoke to the annual Minerals Industry Dinner in Canberra. He described the federal budget as challenging but necessary. Minerals Council Chairman Andrew Michael-Moore also used the occasion to talk about the need for industrial relations reform. But Mr Abbott was steering clear of that one. It seems he's got enough to deal with trying to get Medicare and university changes through the Senate. He doesn't want to add fuel to the fire by flagging changes to IR. The minerals industry is anxious for the budget to pass with its promised axing of the mining and carbon taxes. It's a break that they say they particularly need now, with iron ore prices hitting their lowest since 2012. Other commodities are also down, with gold today plunging to an 18-week low in New York and coal down over 60% since 2011 highs. On the back of such news, Australian mining giant Rio Tinto has today flagged job cuts at its Oyu Tolgoi gold and copper operation in Mongolia. And Queensland coal miner New Hope has announced unspecified redundancies at its mine near Ipswich. That's it for News Today. Back to the studio.
Thanks, Craig. And we'll be back after the break for a look at the craft beer industry taking off in Melbourne.